Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's a continuation of the workshop meeting from yesterday. Let the record reflect that we started promptly on time at the arrival of Mr. Brown and Mr. Dodson, like that in the record. Appreciate Mr. Kasperitz serving as chairman yesterday.
It's a pleasure, sir.
I heard Carol only had to tighten him up 3 or 4 times,
She kicked me appropriately.
so it all worked well, and I really appreciate you doing that, sir. And obviously,
Love them glasses.
you were more than capable of handling those assignments, so thank you very much. The first item on our agenda this morning, I think I'm going to start in a really nice way and ask you to join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the
United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item is a workshop item on the agenda for the Smart Scale Review. Brooke, welcome.
Thank
Nice
you.
to
Good
see you,
morning.
ma'am,
Nice to see you. Welcome back.
and our consultants.
I have Ho
If you
with
will
me.
introduce everybody, Brooke, it'd be great.
Yes. I have Ho Chang with me as well, and he is helping to lead the Smart Scale process review. We have been coming to you over the past couple months, and we are here for another update. So today's presentation will be focused mainly on process biases stemming from the external survey that identified that applicants are not necessarily submitting the projects that are their top priority, especially small projects. So after going through, we're going to start going off with the process biases that, as I said, is identified in the survey. I'll pass it on to Ho after going through this overview and a little summary of where we are. He's going to be focusing on the small project analysis, which pointed out the need to go through project types as well, specifically small project relationship, which led to a bike-ped preference analysis. He'll pass it back to me to go over where the process is having small projects being advantaged, specifically focusing on scoring and funding processes. Next, we're going to identify how the advantages will be balanced through potential process changes. After that, we'll look back at previous recommendations to small projects, and as a note, we'll continue doing this by looking back at the previous recommendations that we bring to you every month and summarize it with the next steps and where we're going with our schedule. But first, where are we in the process? This presentation is 4 out of 8 that we have come to you. We came to you in February, but before that, January, ATCS kicked off the statistical analysis looking at all 5 rounds of data that we have in place in the performance and outcomes of past funding rounds. In February, we came to you with an overview of the Smart Scale process review. And then in April, Ho presented the survey results. In these survey results, the survey was sent to 1,300 people, including the General Assembly, applicants, staff, local officials, regional governing bodies, and the response rate was about 30% from the survey. We interviewed every CTB member and included that as part of our survey assessment. We hosted workshops with reviewers and validators and scorers. And we also have ongoing TAC and EWG meetings getting continual feedback throughout this process. So after completing our survey assessments, then we began the procedural review. And in May last month, we brought to you the overview of Smart Scale so that we were all on the same place before we keep going, and the issue of application quality with a potential recommendation from the staff. In June, this month, we're going to cover the small biases, and in future months, we're going to cover it in the schedule at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to pass it on to Ho to cover biases analysis.
Good morning.
Morning.
We're going to jump right into small project preference. One of the questions we asked during the survey was, do you think the current process is biased in any way? Yes or no question. 59% said yes. So we asked, well, what are some of the biases you think there are in the smart scale process? And urban bias, small project bias, and application process were the three most commonly mentioned biases that the respondents said. So you remember that from April presentation that I gave. So let's look at small project preference. Let's see if the data analysis shows that bias exists or not. So as a reference point for you all, what is a small project? Let's define it as, for our analysis, we define it as projects that are less than $10 million. Why 10 million?
As a request, not a total project cost.
That's exactly right, yeah. So,
Sorry, I just want to be clear about that.
thank you for that. And with that definition, 60% of all applications are defined as small projects. And you may think, well, what about leverage projects? Well, we looked at that as well, and 95% of all our definition small projects have the total cost less than 10 million. So we're capturing pretty much, truly small projects. So let's compare now small projects versus, quote, large projects, large projects being over 10 million. Just as a comparison, 1,092 small projects submitted over the course of 5 rounds, 823 large projects. 4.8 billion requested of small projects, 33.1 billion for large projects. 558 small projects funded, 154 large projects funded. 2.1 billion small projects funded, 4.2 billion large projects funded. So I went over that fairly quickly. I'm going to dive into a little bit more, just giving you the scale and the magnitude between small projects and large projects. So let's look now at success rate of small projects. Small projects have success rate of 51%. So little over 1 of every 2 projects gets funded. If we look at larger projects, 10 million or more, 1 out of every 5 projects. So based on the number of projects, small projects were just over 2 times more successful than large projects. Average project funded amount is 8.9 million. Average amount requested is 19.8, almost 20 million. Okay. Go to the next slide. So,
Excuse me.
Mr. Merrill?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Is that average the small and the large? I'm assuming that average is 8.9 with small and large combined.
this is average across all.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So next slide. Now, we're going to get into the magnitude of small projects, again, compared to large projects. So let me go over the graph. We're just as a kind of a repeat, if you will. The left side is going to be project count, number of projects, and the right side is project amount. That's going to be consistent throughout the presentation. So looking
Well, let me say something.
Please.
If y'all print this out and it's not in color, it's really hard to see that. So I'll just make you, so if you printed it out for your own purposes, you may want to make a note, because that small and large color goes away, and you just see the graphs. Just saying. Thank you.
So graph on the left side shows the number of small projects versus large projects. So let's look at round 1. 132 projects funded that are small versus 37 that were funded in large projects, if you will, with a total of 169. So that was what it was in round 1. So let's go on to the right side. Let's look at funding dollar amount. 436 million for small projects, 1.4 billion for large projects. So the key points, and you can see the little icon, key points, small projects account for 78% of all funded projects. 78%. Small projects, in terms of dollar amount, represents about 1/3 of all dollar amounts. So it kind of makes sense, right? These are small projects, number of them. However, in terms of dollars, it's 1/3. Okay. Now let's break that into funds between DGP District Grant Program and High Priority Program by each round. And I'm going to kind of walk with you for round one again. So there are pair bars for each round. The bar on the left represents DGP. Bar on the right represents HPP. So round one, you can see 84% of the projects by number of projects, by project count, were small projects in DGP. 75%, again, project count, represented small projects within the high priority program. Okay, and you can kind of see that across the board, that overall, based on number of projects, most funded projects in both DGP and HPP are small. That makes sense because we already said 78% of all the projects were small. So it makes sense. In HPP, and I'm going to come back to you with HPP because I wanted you to pay particular attention to that. Based on number of projects, 60% of HPP projects are small. So now let's look at dollar amount because it gives you a slightly different picture. So same idea there. Round one, 48% DGP or small, 8% of HPP, because now we're talking dollar amount, right? So in DGP, small projects are getting roughly same amount, equal amount of funding as larger projects. HPP, I want you to kind of pay attention to the pattern. You can see round 1, 2, and 3, around 8, 10, 11%. And you get a big jump in rounds 4 and 5. So the funded amount of small projects in rounds 4 and 5 was 21% higher than 1, 2, and 3 combined. So you see a pattern here happening with HPP. So let me kind of go over what are some of the small projects, what are they? So we kind of broke it out, I mean, you already have it broken out between highway principal improvement project, bike ped, and bus transit principal improvement project. So what do I mean by principal improvement project? It means the largest component of that application. So highway project, for example, is not always just highways. It usually includes bike and ped components. As a matter of fact, 50% of highway projects include bike ped component. So when I say highways, we think just highways, but half of them include bike ped component. Okay, so highway principal improvement projects are, intersection, turn lane improvements, roadway widening, usually about half a mile or less in length. Makes sense for a small project. Bike and ped, sidewalk projects, share use path, improved crossings, usually less than a mile in length. Okay, and bus transit principal improvement project are new routes or bus stops improvements and things like that. Okay, so one of the things that we found as we were looking at small projects is, there are really two major types of projects in small projects, okay? And they're highway and bike and ped project, okay? So you can look at TDM and bus transit, but really the magnitude and the scale is so small, it's not a fair comparison. So what we thought it was interesting is to now compare these two, okay? Highway projects comprise 74% of all projects submitted in small category. Bike ped comprise 21% of projects submitted. So you can see already 95% of all projects submitted are between the two project types. In terms of funded amounts, highway comprise 67% and bike ped 24%. Okay, so now you kind of see where those two fit in together. And we said, well, let's look at bike and ped in a little more detail. How about if we look at the success rate of each type? So let me explain to you the chart a little bit. On the left again, remember it's number of projects. So bike ped projects had 135 projects that were funded out of 228. 135 out of 228. Highway projects, if you look lower left, 376 out of 804. So the success rate for bike ped projects was 59%, and success rate for highways, 47%. So now let's look at the dollar amount on the right side. Same idea, 55% for bike ped and 39% for highways. So now let's look at this chart, and this is a view of what we see in bike ped project trend. So we kind of saw static overall view, but what's the trend? So we see from round 1 to round 5, steady increase in number of bike ped projects funded and the dollar amount on the right side. So you see the dark blue that shows the funded bike ped in number as well as amounts. So round 1 through round 5 in terms of numbers, you see 13 projects funded in round 1 and 42 in round 5. And if you look at the amount, you see 29 million in round 1 to 221 million in round 5. Right? So you can kind of see the trending here. Small bike ped projects have steadily increased in terms of number of projects and the funding amount, both submitted and recommended. Okay?
Have a reason, excuse me, Mr. Secretary,
Mr. Stant,
you have a reason for that?
we're going to get there.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Good question, Doug. Yeah. So what are some of the findings? Okay. One, small projects were funded over 2 times more than larger projects. Small bike ped projects were more successful than small highway projects. Small projects account for 78% of all projects and 33% of all funding. Bike ped received 25% of the total funding for small projects compared to 69% for highway projects. Average smart scale request has decreased every round from round 1 through 4. There's a little bit of a jump on round 5, and we believe it's because of escalation and some cost estimating refinement that was done that kind of explains it. So you would think normally, think about an average project with inflation and cost of labor and everything, you would see it going up, whereas the average smart scale requests have actually gone down from round 1 through 4. Okay? Bike ped projects, though, have steadily increased in terms of number of projects and funding amounts, both submitted and recommended. So funding amount for, and in particular, I mentioned the HPP program. For bike ped projects, you see an increase in HPP in rounds, especially 4 and 5. So now Brooke is going to go over, so the why is this happening and what are we going to do about it?
So this is to Mr. Stant's question. Where in the process are small projects getting funded? So I'm going to cover that, and specifically in the scoring process and the funding scenario process. And in the scoring process, it's the land use factor that contributes significantly to funded project scores. And in the funding scenario process, HPP dollars facilitate funding small projects, request projects. Giving you a couple of reminders from May, and what you see up there is our process laid out. And like I said, the funding scenario and the scoring scenario each have different components to them. I've highlighted the components that I plan to go over with recommendations, and that is HPP eligibility, the staff scenario steps, and the factor weighting within the scoring process. A reminder from May is that if we adjust one area, it could possibly affect another area. And any singular issue identified might be resolved by adjusting multiple components in the process. A singular process in reverse, an adjustment to a singular process might resolve multiple issues. So we're just being mindful as we continue.
Clarification on that.
Mr. Brown.
That second bullet. So you're saying that in the funding scenario process, high priority dollars facilitate funding small project requests.
Yes.
Counterintuitive.
I will unravel that more, I promise. It's coming.
Yeah.
There will be unraveling. So we're going to get into that. But as we continue to go through this process, just keep in mind that the pendulum might swing further than we want, so just being aware that we could modify these early potential solutions as we continue to work through the modifications through the process. And we will continue to show the effects of multi-consideration together, and I'm going to do that today. I'm going to present 3 scenarios and then show what happens when we combine all 3 of them together, so you can get an idea of swinging the pendulum and then what happens when you bring it all together. So digging a little deeper into land use and where in the scoring process. Specifically, we identified one factor majority impact when we got into the data, where we focused on the land use factor. This table shows the percent of land use by benefit by each factor area, round over round. What we can see is the land use factor drives funding benefit or drives benefits at a rate of 2 times from round 1 to round 5. And I will note that land use was expanded in round 5 to area type C and D, which is rural areas. And that is a change that happened between rounds 1 and 5.
Mr. Secretary?
Ms. Hines?
Just a quick question, Brooke. What's the percentage if you kept it just at A and B in round 5, just for comparison of what it was doing before?
I do not have that.
Back on that?
We'll have to
I'm
come
just
back.
curious.
Yeah, we'll come back on that.
Thank you.
So what you're saying is, just look at the factor before it was expanded, say what percent is in those categories, and then what did the expansion
Right,
create?
because the
variable-
49% isn't
The
really.
marginal impact of the change is what you're
Exactly,
looking
that's
for.
what I'm looking for.
Yes, ma'am.
We'll have that. The land use also has a large scoring impact on small projects, and this table shows the percent of land use benefit by funded project cost. So it's categorized into $10 million increments, and you can see there's a general trend of smaller projects having a larger benefit coming from land use. So the larger the project, the less of the benefit is coming from land use. Land use has a large scoring impact on project type as well, specifically bike and ped projects. This table shows the percent of land use benefit by principal improvement type compared to all types. Bike and ped projects have the most land use benefit, twice the amount in bike and ped when compared to highway projects. The transit categories are expected based on population density, and I'm going to get into how land use is calculated next, so that statement makes a little more sense. Currently, land use method is more related to where the project is located than the expected project outcomes. So we score it's an evaluation of walkability to non-work destinations such as grocery stores, healthcare, education, libraries, and it's in the vicinity of the proposed improvement. And that is weighted on population and employment density. So it does not matter if it is a sidewalk project or a roadway project. If it is in the exact same location, the land use score would be exactly the
Hey,
same.
Brooke, the use of the word is more related to project location as opposed to it's related to project location.
It is.
It's not just more, it is,
Thank you.
right? I mean, that's what's driving it, right? And location doesn't mean, the way we do this, it presumes an outcome because of the location, as opposed to a projected outcome by analysis. So if you're in a dense area, if you're in the area that the land use gives you credit for, we don't look at the result or the projected result. We just, boom, you got that score now, because you're in, sort of, you're in or you're out, right? And so that's part of because it doesn't really get to an outcome. It gets to a location, as Brooke said. I think that's a very important point. Please.
I don't want to miss pointing out, especially round 5, that funded projects got a significant portion of their overall benefit points from land use. 77 projects funded out of the 152 that were in the staff recommended scenario had over 50% of the benefit score coming from land use. Of those, 40 projects had over 80% of the benefit score coming from land use. So this was a big indicator to us that there is something we need to work towards fixing.
Mr. Brown? Yes, sir.
So if you're doing a highway or a primary project that would require you to take land, let's say you're going through a fairly dense area, maybe it's Route 1 or 17 in Northern Virginia. Sure. That's going to get dinged significantly from a land use perspective because it's where there already is density and the land impacts would be consequential. Is that the way to think
I
about
think
this?
it's the other way, I think.
Or is it the other way around?
It's the other way around.
That
It's
helps
if
or
you're in a location that qualifies under our land use definition, rural, urban, suburban, it doesn't matter, then if you do a project in that area, you get that benefit without saying, do I really get the benefit? Show me how I get the benefit. So like when we do congestion relief, right, we forecast what that relief is going to be. When we do land use, we just say, if you're there, you get it. If you're not there, you don't. And so it presumes that there's a benefit, and there, obviously, a lot of people think there is some benefit and sort of in big picture, but it presumes that each of those projects get that full benefit, if you will, even though the specific project may or may not really go to that, because it's where it happens, right? So if you're in a dense area, or the other factors that weigh into that, then you're going to get that score, period, no matter what you do. So for example, in the bike ped thing, if we had a projection, which would be absurd, that if you put this bike lane in, no one would ever use it, ever, and our projection was strong and we just believe that, which is absurd, of course, but I'm using it to make the argument, you get the score anyway. Okay. Right? Doesn't matter what the outcome is or what the projection even is. You just get it because that's where you did it. And so that's.
So to say it differently, adding, just abstractly, adding a bike lane to a high-traffic, dense area produces gets a benefit score, even if it's not likely that folks will use the bike lane.
Correct. And they may or may not, but it doesn't go to the outcome. It goes to the place, right? So if we did congestion that way, right? And we did a project in a really congested area, and it didn't help congestion at all, but we did one because it was in a congested area, and by definition, because we did it in a congested area, it gets a congestion score. Even if it doesn't reduce congestion, that doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense, excuse me.
Zero.
Yeah. Mr. Merrill.
Mr. Secretary, so based on what you just said, Mr. Secretary, so that explains why some of the projects that had previously not scored well, they added a park and ride or a bike lane or sidewalk, their scoring improved dramatically.
Could be.
Yeah, there would be some nuance in that. I would say in round 5, we saw improvements happen to previously applied for projects that were in more of the small Main Street. If you were on a Main Street density type area, we saw improvement, not necessarily adding a specific component.
Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir.
How-
Mr. Lawson.
Thank you. How do we get to what you just said? The land use definition as it's used now is for future
Well, let's stay tuned. The answer is we're going to talk about that today, but that's one of our challenges is how to get, this is an iterative process as you've seen. So we're identifying something that looks like what's going on there. And then we dig into it to see what's going on. And is it something that we're expecting or like in the system or not? And if we don't like it, if we think it's given us bad answers, if you will, then how do we modify it to make sure it gives us good answers? And we're not there yet, but we'll get there.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, Ms. Hines.
Yesterday, when we were talking about V-Trans, we had an interesting conversation about one of the guiding principles, which has to do with land use, collaborating with local governments. And we had a conversation about what do we mean by this word collaborate. But I do think that there's a piece that land use is a place these two things kind of connect. And so, wherever we're going with this, I think we have to keep in mind that part of what we're trying to do is incentivize local governments to do things that are smart when they're planning their communities. So
I don't think there's anything that's implied in here that would suggest that land use isn't a consideration that we should have. I think what I'm getting out of this is, and it's iterative, right? We're not finished this process yet. But what I'm getting out of this is that the way we apply it doesn't give us what we want, right? And so it's over-applying because you're either in or you're out. That's what I think we're battling with, and we're more about outcomes than sort of, not outcomes, if you will. So
Right.
that's where we're getting at. And I think it's also important to note that when we look at this, and Ho said this, of all the other projects we're talking about, not these, all the rest of them, half of them have bike ped in them, right? So it's not like they're not in the other ones either. And that's okay. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just saying, when we're focusing in on bike ped projects, that's bike ped only. And of all the other projects that we do, half of those have bike ped in them as well. So there's a bunch of bike ped going in. This isn't about, getting rid of that per se, but it's about trying to do it better, make more sense.
Right, and Mr. Secretary, I appreciate that, and that's been something I've focused on for a long time. I work on it at NBTA too. Like we're not just doing road projects; we're doing multimodal, and I think that's right.
Appropriately.
I do think a little bit about the places in our Commonwealth that are already dense,
Yep.
right? Where a big road project just isn't ever going to be something that happens. And so that's a balancing act too.
I'm not sure I agree with that, but I hear you.
Well, I mean, yeah, you could widen Route 1 through Alexandria if you liked. You wouldn't do it, but,
We ride 95, we built 66,
Well,
we're
but I
gonna do
would-
495 at some point. They're all dense
well,
areas.
right, they are, and they're we're working inside of predominantly existing. But I'm thinking about the more built-out inside the Beltway places or the edges, out where the subway is now going, or into Prince William, where we're going to be doing other things. I want us.
More local routes is what you're really suggesting.
Well, really, and where congestion is real, I mean, it's real, car congestion is real, people are looking for alternatives. I guess as we just think about this, that's we need to be able to balance the needs of different parts of the Commonwealth too.
Ms. Hines, I would tell you, I think that most folks would think that the consideration of land use appropriately, which is, is appropriate. To ignore it, I don't think that this is going to suggest that. I think it's how do we capture the benefits that we're looking to get without over scoring it and getting more than we naturally would because of this 1-0 kind of situation. All right, Brooke, let's continue. Thank you.
Continuing with how the advantage can be balanced, the staff recommendation is to make modifications to the land use factor. There will be no change to the way that land use benefit is calculated today, but it would enhance all other factor benefits based on where it's located. The land use factor would be used to increase benefit points based on where it's located, but it would increase the benefit points in other factor areas. This would in turn prevent land use from being the sole driver of success. The specific weighting factor adjustments to land use and other factor areas will be brought in our next presentation in July when we bring up forward-looking processes and safety priority. So right now what we did was make some assumptions based on reducing the land use value, and we're going to bring the discussion of greater weighting of all the different measures together next month. We do have existing precedents for doing this factor calculation this way in the environmental factor. In A1, the 10% of the E1 factor comprises all of the environmental factor, and it relies on another measure to get a score. So it only receives a benefit score if there is a delay in reduction. And then E2, which is our environmental impact, is up to a 5-point deduction on benefit. So we have this precedent to do a similar factor calculation. It's enhancing benefits that are on all the other factor areas, enhancing the benefits based on the location.
Yes, Mr. Gasperitz.
Brooke, can you explain how that would, well, maybe at your
yeah,
next
right.
slide. Okay.
No,
I understand how the environmental part works. I'm not quite sure how you're
Yeah,
suggesting.
let's keep going a little bit.
Okay.
Ms. Gasperitz, we may get there, and if we don't,
I will
we'll
stand
come
by.
back.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, so when applying the modifications to land use factors, we looked at round 5 data. I showed a similar slide last month. And just as a reminder, this is only a scenario looking back at round 5. The average total cost of funded projects raised from 15.1 million to 18.3 million. And the average total request of funded projects raised from 10.1 million to 11.8 million. The scenario, it removes land use focused benefits and some assumptions on weighting were made, but we anticipate the discussions next month. So we do have to apply weighting adjustments to this, and it gives a bonus if there are benefits in the other factor areas. And I will be presenting on 3 more scenarios moving forward after I go through this slide. And this is one where it applies to both DGP and HPP because scoring changes directly impact the benefit and the smart scale score. Funded projects overall were reduced from 106 to 41 in this scenario. Funded bike ped principal improvement types were reduced from 51 to 20 in this scenario. So continuing with how this small project advantage can be balanced, the staff recommendation is to make modifications to refining the high priority projects program definition. DGP is written into Virginia code and HPP is more focused CTB policy, on CTB policy. The code is up there and it is a little open-ended, but the state law identifies that high priority is meant for regional and statewide significant projects. Current CTB policy defines the where through VTrans needs, but not the what. So the where is currently defined through the need met on corridors of statewide significance and regional networks. The staff recommendation would be to propose the what. And this would include projects that have minimum feature types in the application. And they are listed here as new capacity highway, managed lanes, new or improved interchanges, new or improved passenger rail stations or service, freight rail improvements, and fixed guideway transit. There can and should still be multimodal projects with many components, but the ones I listed will be a minimum requirement on an application. What does this do? After reviewing the HPP definition, we need to look at how we allocate it through our steps. We've identified that we're funding small projects with HPP dollars in step 2 specifically, and this kind of adds on to Mr. Brown's question. And I'll go into more historical detail as well on the next slide. But first, how the allocation steps are currently used. In step 1, DGP is allocated on a district-wide basis, and I should point out that only localities are eligible for step 1. In step 2, it allocates HPP on a district-wide.
Let's not gloss over that point. So what does it mean? I mean, I know what the words are, but what does it mean when only localities are eligible for that? So no MPOs, no TPOs, no regional, nobody else. And
Only
so if you don't
localities.
use those entities, if they don't participate, they're not in that process, just the locality, right?
Correct. And in step 1, you can be eligible for both DGP and HPP, but you need to be having your application submitted from your local jurisdiction. For DGP, yes, and DGP is allocated.
That will sort of show its head later a little bit.
That's in code, right?
In code. Virginia code is outlined. It is also outlined the allocation of the amounts of money that goes into each district. And that is a big piece of this puzzle, is how much the DGP pot is, then defines step 2. And step 2 allocates HPP on a district-wide basis. And on the reverse, only MPOs, transit agencies, PDCs are eligible for step 2. So you have to be one of those entities to be eligible for step 2. You cannot be a locality and be eligible for step 2.
Brooke, that's our policy.
That is CTP policy.
Secretary,
Ms. Lawson,
what's our authority to modify the code or refine the code?
0. But this is policy.
Two is policy.
Step 2 is policy.
No, I guess I'm gonna slide back where we're gonna refine, I guess, what the code is defined as high priority projects with a what?
No, that's in our policy. This is this is laying on top of the code into our policy.
Okay. Do you
Right,
want
so-
us to comment on that recommendation, or is that something that's gonna come up later?
You can comment anytime, sir.
Okay, because I don't understand how, and maybe this is to Ms. Hines' points about the differences of Northern Virginia versus the rest of the Commonwealth, but if we're going to incorporate some of these things like managed lanes and passenger rail stations, things like that, I can think of a lot of areas in the Commonwealth where that just isn't going to happen. So does that mean they're going to be less eligible for high-priority projects, even though they're in areas that have significant road networks of regional or statewide significance that they want to enhance somehow?
So this is about defining the what of what a project of regional and statewide significance is to the board. We will give more context of why we think it needs more definition around it. And the step 2 helps define that the projects that are being submitted are smaller and smaller and are not of quality of what you would consider are a statewide high priority. An example could be, we had a few turn lane improvements that happened to be on corridors of statewide significance submitted as high priority and got high priority dollars assigned to it in step 2. There are very small projects that are being deemed as projects of regional and statewide significance, and that's the issue.
So they may be in the right place, but their impact is not as significant as we may want.
I guess my concern is the narrower we get by policy, do we have an unintended consequence of squeezing out
Good.
projects that otherwise everyone would objectively say qualify as high priority projects, but sorry, you don't have a rail station, so you're not going to get it.
No, you don't have to have a rail station, but no,
Or
I hear
some of the
I
other
hear what you're saying.
criteria.
We can refine it.
And we haven't, there's no final recommendation here, right? At the end of the day, what we're saying is the concept of high priority was something that was substantial and significant, right? And so even though this might be a good project, and even though it might be in a place that qualifies, the project in and of itself, when you look at it from a statewide perspective or regional perspective, is not significant in and of itself. And so what we're trying to do is get more impact or look at having more impact in that category because we want to drive more benefit through that process. Now, we're not there yet, Mr.
No, I
Lawson.
get it. My point is, it is a process. Each site is different. They each have different qualities. And I understand staff's desire to create rules and regs and so on to make it simpler or easier. I kind of like the broader language so that we can evaluate each one independently because they are different.
But see, if you read the code, think about it like this. Where it says on slide 23, means high priority projects means those projects of regional or statewide significance. Stop. Not in an area of regional or statewide significance, but the project itself has regional or statewide significance. And I think the significance is what we're sort of talking about, right? Is it really significant on a statewide look or a regional look? So we put a turn lane somewhere. Is that regionally significant or statewide significant, which is what we believe the intention was of the code. So we're just trying to push down, and, you know, we're not ending up anywhere yet. Ms.
I
Lawson.
guess my point is, I think it's a subjective thing, and I think it's intentionally subjective, and I would be cautious about trying to make it objective, because we may end up unintentionally squeezing out things that this body would otherwise say, yes, it is of statewide significance, but we can't, because we've changed our policies.
It says consider projects, so we're going to give ourselves some latitude in here, right?
Secretary, can I
Yes, sir,
just
Mr.
add some
Brown.
context here? Part of what I think has happened, and I will admit that the Richmond District is culpable in this, is groups have gotten smart. And they've gotten strategic, and they've read the code, and they've been coached maybe by people that understand what the process work. And so amongst the jurisdictions and the TPOs, they strategically develop their applications and decide, this is going to go in the district because we know how the process works. We're going to put this turn lane off of Route 1 and the HPP process through the TPO, and we'll maximize our possibilities of receiving these dollars. And so, Mr. Lawson, I don't disagree with you that the discretion that was intended has the ability to give this board flexibility, and I'll come back to that. But what's happened is the larger regions have become strategic and smart about this process. And so the recommended scenarios following those formulas produce outcomes. Now, here's where we either can take on more responsibility or less, right? You guys can do that because I'll be gone after this meeting in about an hour. Is we don't have to go with this recommended scenario, right? That's the thing that my parting comment to this board is that the code intended for there to be objective criteria to recommend a scenario so that there is transparency and understanding how the dollars could be allocated. But at the end of the day, once that's published, we have complete discretion to say no. Now, with the HPP pool, it becomes complicated because that's amongst us all. And it becomes pretty complicated when, if Richmond District has won a turn lane off of Route 1, and, Mr. Yates or Ms. Hines once says, well, that's a turn lane, we shouldn't be doing that. I might, get my Irish up, right? I got a little Irish in me. And resist that, right? So it becomes a little complicated to do that, right? So I think what's being suggested is you can defer to this body to engage and fix the process subjectively on the back end, which we've not done a lot of because we like each other. We don't want to necessarily get in these fights. Or you can adjust the process so that even the really, really smart and strategic jurisdictions have to operate within a certain fairway, such that these projects aren't able to slip through just because of the formula. I think that's what.
I think that's right. I think at the end of the day, all we want, right, as a group, is we want the projects that bring the best benefit. This is an overarching statement. The projects that bring the most benefits to the citizens of the Commonwealth. That's what we want, right? And so we're trying to get the system that we use, and it's a great system, by the way, the system that we use to see if there's anything that's not doing that. And so one of the things as you read that, as I read that, as I've struggled with this through my time on the board, means those projects of regional or statewide significance. And Mr. Brown, a turn lane, although important and may have good benefit, is that what was intended by a project of regional or statewide significance? And in my view, it's probably not. And so how do we get to things that are more impactful, right? So we got our district things, we sort of look within our district. Then we got things where we look across the state and say, what are the most important projects that bring the biggest benefit? And let's take the HPP that they gave us in the legislature and use that to fund those that have a benefit to so many people across the Commonwealth because it's a corridor of statewide significance that we're having a significant impact on. And I think that's where the disconnect is. Brooke, if you'll continue.
And to add on to that, HPP has not grown since round 2. There are a multitude of reasons, but however, DGP is now enhanced by the supplemental district grant revenues, and it has grown significantly. And that has two important things. There is about 2/3 of the money, give or take, every round it's going to swing differently, but about 2/3 of the money from round 5 was DGP and 1/3 is HPP. So we're left to prioritize as a board of a much smaller portion of these dollars and define the significance around them. I did not mention, but step 3 allocates HPP on a statewide basis, and all entities are eligible for this. I do want to give more context around step 2 before I moved on, but it was introduced in round 1 to give the opportunity to fund higher benefit cost projects out of the district with HPP funds. But we're noticing that that intent is not being met, to Mr. Brown's points. We're seeing that applicants are using step 2 more specifically to get smaller and smaller projects applied for and funded, and I'll show you what that looks like on the next slide. But one other component, like I mentioned, with the supplemental district grant growing, the limit of step 2 is the district grant. So you're allowed to go down the list within the district in step 2 until you hit the district grant pot for that district's limit. So if you get skipped in step 2, you go to the district pot limit, and that pot keeps growing. So you can go further and further down in step 2. Like I said, the pot is much bigger now than it used to be. So the intent of round 1 is not necessarily the intent now in round 5.
And I think we're going to, it may be helpful, Brooke, in a subsequent meeting to dig into that flow a little bit. Because it's
Exactly how it's
it's a
calculated.
confusing flow, right? It's a confusing
With the
flow and the
skipping.
limits and what, you know. So we'll help step through that. That'll help clarify some of this, I think.
Absolutely do that. All right. The staff recommendation, after defining HPP pot, we also want to make a staff recommendation on step 2. And that would be eliminating step 2 and prioritizing all high priority projects program statewide by smart scale score. So this would simplify the process. And to be clear, there would be 2 steps. One that is DGP sorted by the district and smart scale score. And the second step would be sorted statewide by the smart scale score. This is the recommendation. This table shows how.
And what does that go to, in your opinion, Brooke? Does it go to the intent of the code? Is that what we're trying to get to?
This is.
Tie it back together.
Right. This is simplifying the process that if we define HPP, there isn't as much of a necessity for step 3. We were trying to define HP by step 3 before. Just to be clear, that's how step 3 was set up, was to define HPP, and I didn't have that on the slide there. But since we are defining HPP with more clarity, the necessity for step 3 isn't there. So in this table right here, this table shows how step 2 applications and allocations have evolved since round 1. I'm going to point out an example. This shows step 2 eligible, again, regional entities, transit agencies, MPOs, PDCs. In round 1, we saw 48 projects were submitted for step 2 eligibility with an average request of $57 million. Out of that, 23 of those projects were funded in step 2, or they were step 2 eligible. 23 were funded with an average funded value of $4 million per project. So we were funding small projects even in round 1 with HPP. But as the rounds go on, the applicants are starting to see that step 2 eligible is successful for them for small projects and are making that connection. And you can see in round 5, there were 81 projects submitted that were step 2 eligible at almost a third of the average request, at $19 million at the average request, and 28 of those were funded.
So more, but less.
Exactly.
More projects, less
Less
amount.
value. And overall, even though you see we get to 10 million this round, with consistently funding less than what our small project value throughout those rounds. Okay. This is going to show, and hang with me here, I'm going to show two scenarios back to back and to show kind of the swing that happens between the two. So refining the HPP definition, when we apply that to the round 5 staff scenario, step 2 and 3 average project size rose from 15.6 million with 30 projects to 76.2 million, only funding 6 projects in this scenario. All bike and ped principal improvement types were removed from HPP. And the summary is that rural areas do take the brunt of this scenario, but you'll see the other scenario balances it in the other direction once I show you what happens when we remove step 3. If we were to, or eliminate step 2, if we were to eliminate just step 2, and this is the scenario singularly, and the one I showed you before was the scenario singularly. This is again only round 5, but the steps 2 and step 3 in this scenario rose from 15.6 million, oh, excuse me, I'm saying the wrong one. When we look at eliminating step 2 only and prioritizing by smart scale score, this smart scale review highlighted the favor of small projects. Ho went over that we're seeing that there is a bias towards small projects. So this scenario does highlight that a little bit more. And smaller projects are not necessarily a bad thing. Value engineering, targeted solutions, encouraging leveraging, like these are all tenets of smart scale. And I do want to make that a part of this. And I think we'll talk more about that as we get into the next discussions next month. But in this scenario, smaller projects get funded in both DGP and HPP. And it really highlights the importance of refining the definition of an HPP eligible project. I'll point out that HPP funded went from an average project size of 15.6 million, 30 projects, to 12.4, 44 projects. So we're getting
different
smaller.
slides, Brooke.
Oh. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
No problem.
So the scenario gets bigger in this case. So we add a lot of smaller projects is the summary here. And the other one, we removed too many. So we were removing a lot, and this one we're adding a lot. And that is going to be the importance of combining these two together, because both urban and rural areas in this scenario increase the projects in the scenario.
Going
Do not
backwards.
have, let me get to the combined.
29. 28. 28.
On the combined, like I said, we're trying to balance these two together. So this does include the land use solution. It includes the step 2 elimination, and it includes the refining of the HPP scenarios.
What you're saying is if you took those preliminary recommendations and you added them all together and you addressed round 5 only, this is what would happen differently, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
So combining these scenarios together balances the two HPP solutions. We had one that dramatically increased the number of projects and decreased the project size, and we had the reverse happen in the other scenario. So these two blend together, and the HPP average funded went from 15.6 with 30 projects to 31.8 in 17 projects. So we're finding the balance between these two. Bike and ped principal improvement types reduced from 51 to 15, and again highlighting that there are a lot of highway principal improvement types that have the bike and ped components in the projects. And this specifically is focused in the HPP money definition of where these projects are being reduced from.
This is all, remember, this is all HPP, right? This is all HPP.
This does have DGP components in the combined.
This does, okay.
Yes, but
So
I
it's
was
not
just
HPP.
highlighting that bike and ped principal improvement types, most of the reduction that you see there is through the
In the HPP.
redefining of the HPP definition.
Okay.
But this is the whole enchilada of the 3 scenarios combined together.
Yeah, Mr.
So
Brown.
in this scenario, since there isn't a step two, where do the TPOs and other regional groups get to participate?
They're eligible for our new step two.
Oh,
So
new
it
step.
simplifies the process.
Okay.
There's 2 steps in this scenario. 2 steps. 1, smart scale score stays in the district, sort by smart scale score in the district. And then you move to step 2, which would be sort the entire state by your smart scale score and start allocating down the line. But there is the importance of having definition around what is eligible for HPP.
So again, just to walk through the process, so in this scenario, you score, if it qualifies for district, it comes out, and then you don't resort, but then you look at the list of what wasn't funded by district, and that's how you allocate the high priority. But a project that would qualify for our new what could be applied for by the district or the TPOs and would get considered in both categories.
So just to add a little more context, if you were an MPO or PDC entity, you would still need to be eligible. You aren't going to be eligible for DGP. That is written in Virginia
But the
code.
but the county, but the locality.
The
could-
localities are,
Locality could
so-
submit it,
Right.
to Mr. Brown's point, locality could submit it in DGP, right?
Yes.
And then an MPO could submit it in HPP.
But a locality is still eligible for HPP. I don't want to miss that point.
Sure.
So-
Although the scenario is that most, I'm thinking about 64 New Kent. New Kent did submit it as a district grant project, but also the TPO submitted it as a regional project. There was a lot of debate about that because the TPO was concerned about using its silver bullet on a project that they thought should have been statewide. And so there's always a lot of back and forth when you happen to be on one of those corridors, 95, where that major corridor impacts local traffic flow, yeah. So, but in this scenario, it wouldn't matter as much
Yeah.
because it'd
That's
be
correct.
considered in both places.
There's less room to figure out how to make the process work for that applicant instead of defining what works for the state and for our body. I think that is the
Mark?
point here, and to simplify.
Let's continue. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes, Ms. Merrill.
I don't want to open up another can of worms since we got a, since we got,
This is,
Can't
this
open
is,
your hand.
since we got a fishing pier full of them right now. But there's no reference here to the supplemental grant allocation. And I know I'd sent a letter to Ms. Secretary about that. And it's complicated with regard to the 81 funding, but if you look at the allocation of the supplemental grant, the orders of magnitude within districts is quite remarkable. To where districts that have very close allocation of district grant funds, Frederick, Stanton, Culpeper, Lynchburg, are pretty similar on the district grant fund. On the supplemental grant fund, the Stanton district is 1/5 to 1/7 of what's going to the other jurisdictions. And that therefore causes projects that scored higher in the Stanton district not to be funded because we're not eligible for that supplemental because of the fuel tax issue on 81. So to your earlier comment that you touched one thing, touched another, and I understand the Secretary's point to me has been, okay, but we're getting $81. But if you look at 81, just look at the license plate, tell me that is a corridor of statewide significance, and the money going there decreases the availability of funding for other projects in Stanton.
there is no question, Mr. Merrill, it's the same. I think this is really what defines sort of the issue. It's the same in Hampton Roads. It's the same in Northern Virginia. We take their supplemental money and we give it to their TPO, right? Almost all of it. A little bit into Hampton Road stays, and it goes into those projects, right? It goes into their regional TPO projects. The problem with the 81 works the same way. The problem is we're talking about 81, we're not talking about Hampton Roads. and we're not talking about Northern Virginia. So it's the whole 81 corridor, right? And so you got a couple of districts that are impacted there. So we look at it monolithically as money going to that part. That's their supplemental money. It's funding the 81, just like the supplemental money in Hampton Roads is funding the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel and all the express lanes. That's where it's going. And in Northern Virginia, similarly. And so the problem is you're in there's 3 districts there, right? And we don't look at that in the supplemental allocation of the 81 money. It just goes to the 81 project, and wherever that puts the money is where it puts the money. So you are at sort of in a different scenario because you've got those 3 districts. Where in Hampton Roads you got 1, and in Northern Virginia you got 1. And that's what really drives sort of the concern, I think. If it was all, like if you represent the Stanton district, and all that money went to the Stanton district because that's where the 81 project was, I don't think we'd be having the same conversation, because it'd be exactly like Hampton Roads and exactly like Northern Virginia. That's not your situation, because you got a long corridor, 300 and some miles, and we dump the supplemental onto that 325 wherever it goes, and some hands in yours, and some it goes to his, and some goes to hers, and you don't see the benefit in your specific district. You see it in the corridor.
No, I appreciate that, and I don't disagree with anything you said. The difference, though, is that a larger percentage of the population in the 81 corridor have the 81 fuel tax in the Stanton district than the other 2 districts, Salem and Bristol.
It's part of that. It's part of that where the revenue comes from, where the funding goes. If you look at the 81 corridor, it's fine. If you look at it by district, then you get that disparity. I understand that.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, Ms. Hines.
Doesn't the elimination of step 2 in a way address Mr. Merrill, the old step 2 address Mr. Merrill's concern? Because those projects in the Stanton district that had high scores, that got passed over, but there was no extra money, will have higher scores than ones that get passed over or ones that are eligible for HPP. So it seems like if you have high-scoring projects, they're very likely to get funded in HPP.
I think you're correct. I think what my interpretation of this presentation is that Stanton will be advantaged by this because our projects competed more favorably on the HP in scoring, but because we had such a small district grant formula, we had to cap it so they couldn't be funded.
Right. We'll see. This is, as you know, and I've been doing this not as long as Ms. Hines or Mr. Kasperitz, but to get it all sort of in your brain and understand when you hit this, what that does, it's a bit complicated. And that's one reason complicated's good as long as it gives you exactly what you want and everybody sort of understands it. But it's complicated. It's a lot easier if it's sort of simple and as long as it gives you the results that was intended by the program. And so we're trying to do both at the same time. Make it better reflect the value to the citizen, right? Better reflect that, and also be easier to understand. If we can do both, we should walk away proud. That's the goal. Now, we got a lot more meetings to go. We got a lot more months to go, and there's certainly an ability to come back offline as well and sort of talk about some of these things offline, as long as we're doing it, FOIA properly, to grind through some of this. So you're going to take some of this home, you're going to think about it some more, and you're going to have some more questions. And I would just encourage you to try to let us help you grind through it. Okay, thanks, Bert.
So lastly, each month when we come to you, we're going to bring back previous recommendations that we've had and see if it applies to the topic that we brought up as a potential advantage or a bias, and see if a previous recommendation has a crossover impact on that potential issue. So looking at last month, we brought the application cap limit, and it does look at addressing small project bias as well. And the intent here, as a reminder, is to force applicants to prioritize submissions based on priorities. And in the testing scenario, the overall project cost and size was increased in funded projects, and we anticipate a reduction in small projects as a result of the cap limit reduction as well. So next month, it'll look a little different that we bring in these recommendations with last. So where are our next steps with this process review? There is going to be a second part to the process biases brought to you next month before we do the retreat, and that's going to be focused on urban and rural and leverage projects and low-scoring projects. And I think that will tie in Mr. Merrill's comment as well with the low-scoring projects and tying to what it looks like with the scenarios that we brought forward as well. We're going to bring some of the scoring processes forward to dig a little bit further into the weeds of how the scoring processes would be impacted in factor weighting in July before we get to the retreat. And the retreat is going to be us working through everything we've presented so far and focusing on a couple other areas of analysis and discussing these preliminary recommendations in combination. There is no plan to have a meeting in August, but in September, we'll come back to you with a retreat summary, look at a couple other factors that are requiring less recommendations, but the disconnect between need and benefit and the flexibility in the project change process and project performance as a whole, Margie has been looking at before and after analysis. So project performance is how are our smart scale projects that are built performing, and are they performing like we said they would from our smart scale perspective? We plan to bring final recommendations in October to you. In November, there is no planned meeting, but we do want to put a TBD just to make sure if we have time, if we need to add something, we will and we can. And then in December, the plan would be to make policy adoptions.
Great. Ms. Lawson. Mr. Lawson is standing behind you.
Yeah, I'm hiding, lurking in the background.
He's lurking.
Lurking in the background. I just want to take a really quick minute to thank all of you for your attention and patience as we work through this. I know we've been hitting you every month for several months, and we're going to keep doing that for several more months as we work through this. As you can see, it's not simple. We're trying to simplify it, but it is a lot of complexity behind it, and we really are trying to get it right so that it's helping so that Smart Scale can continue to be a good tool for you to decide the projects that should be funded.
It's a good tool. We're gonna try to make it better. That's all we're gonna try to do.
So I just want to-
And Ho and Brooke, I mean, y'all are doing great. Really appreciate it. And by the way, they're not really driving towards any sort of outcome, right, per se. I mean, we're just looking at what it's doing and trying to figure out we are driving to an outcome, which is bigger benefit for the dollar to the citizen. But there's no sort of like, we're not doing it in a way that's biased to any particular thing other than that, I guess I should say.
Yeah,
So
this
thank
is
you.
a tremendous effort.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Agency staff, the commissioner and director have got numerous staff involved with this. It's a tremendous amount of work going on in the background with Brooke and Ho and quite a cast of characters involved in this as we are moving it forward.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes, sir, Dr. Smoot.
subject to Brooks' validation, let me offer this observation.
Yes,
When
sir.
we consider what we're spending on bike and pedestrian work, the number associated with this project considerably understates what is actually being spent because we have many highway-related projects
50%.
that have a bike and pedestrian part of them, which is not counted here.
Right, 50% of the other projects have bike ped in them, at some
Yeah.
level. I don't know what percent it is or anything, I'm just saying it's in there. I mean,
That's my
and appropriately so,
impression,
right?
too.
I mean,
Yeah.
in many cases,
Sure.
appropriately so.
Sure.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, sir, I'm gonna go to Mr. Stanton and come back to Ms. Hines.
Just for clarification, this board has the ability to modify smart scale except for the 6 factors that are codified. Other than that, we can adjust the weight of
Other
the
than what the
factors.
law directs us to do, we have We can set policy to,
Yeah, and we can't change the definition of high-priority projects.
sir.
But
don't need to, in my
I
opinion.
don't need to. I agree with that.
We're just implementing it, right? And listen, I was here when it started as a kernel of an idea, right? A long time ago. And then these folks sort of put the meat on the bones, right? I remember we were talking about how we were gonna, what factors we were gonna use and who was gonna, and how about this area versus that area? And they figured all that out and did a pretty darn good job, in my view, when it came back and got back involved in it. But like, we're figuring it out as, you know, we're just trying to make it better as we go along, and we've seen some things they're, you know, jump out at you, and you gotta go look at them and say, okay, well, is that the way we wanna go or not? And so that's where we are. I mean, it's been a really good process. It's been a lot of hard work. The step 2, 3 thing always hung me up, to just make sure I understood what, if I did this, what it impacted over here. And, you know, I have to get reoriented to it and sort of look at it. So we're gonna try, if we can, I think we ought to make it simpler, as long as the simplification comes with at least the same level of outcome or improvement, and I think we can do both. So that's where I'm heading. That's where I think we ought to go. Let's stand.
Suppose we have suggestions on how, specific suggestions on the weight of the factors. When is that to be raised?
We're getting there. We're getting there. It'll come. When are we gonna see?
Next month. So if you have specific considerations, we can be talking and taking in. We have already, from our external survey and discussions with the board, context of priorities, and we're going to marry that with data as well. So we are still open and available for more additional recommendations.
And we can do that here, but some of this, as you get into some of the details, if you work with Brooke or O or John a little bit and give them your thoughts, it'd be good. Ms. Hunt?
Specifically, right now, safety's 5%, at least in Hampton Roads and probably in Northern Virginia. To me, it's a ridiculous number. I mean, safety's got to be somewhere way north of that. And obviously, as Brooke said, it's gonna, once you,
I would caution, well, no, go ahead, I'm sorry.
anyway, I know that if you increase safety, something's got to be decreased. I mean, that.
We've been through that a couple times.
Because 100's 100, and it
That's
can't
right.
be any more than 100.
Can't get any more than 100.
So, I mean, if I want to increase safety and want this board to consider increasing the safety factor, how do we do that? When does that come up?
That'll come up between now and when you vote on it in December.
Next month and retreat.
Yeah. So next month, we'll start getting into some of that.
So I apologize, Mr. Secretary. So as a group, we're going to discuss, if Mr. Stant wants to bring up a project, we're going to talk about that?
Let's stop for a second.
Or do you do it
We've got
one-on-one?
we got 5 regions across the Commonwealth. You know, I don't know that that's codified. I think we did that.
Or areas.
4 areas, excuse me.
I don't know what's codified and what's really.
I don't think that's
not
codified.
No, because
that's
Richmond
policy.
District left
Yeah,
one and
that's
moved. I
just
mean,
policy.
we've had movement.
And we combined some of them to use the same scoring system and some not, right? And we decided within each of those how we were going to divvy up that 100%. And all that's on the table. Okay. Everything's on the table as it relates to policy, not as it relates to code. And I don't think we're going to, well, at least now, I don't know that we've identified anything that we need to go get changed in the code. So that's good news, right? We're within the guardrails that the General Assembly gave us, and appropriately so. Now, inside of that, we're just trying to make this sausage work better, this sausage maker work a little bit better. Ms. Hines?
Mr. Secretary, I have 2 issues. You know, we've said that 50% of the highway projects have some form of bike ped, something.
Oh, said that, yes.
Yeah, you've said that. I think that we need to be a little bit mindful of what the something is.
How much?
Yeah, well, how many lane miles, how wide, is it a
How much, meaning, what's the impact?
Yeah,
Right.
well, I mean, just, there are standards that make these trails and roadside things comfortable for users, And you can also put things in that are not comfortable for users, and they don't use them in the same capacity. I don't think that we have a statement that we want highway expansions to include these, but I don't know that we have standards. And so that's really my request, as we continue to have this conversation, let's be clear what we're calling a bike ped facility.
Well, I'm 100% about the concern, I have the same concern that as we have been driving, and we can, whether you agree or not, we've been driving more bike ped work in the Commonwealth. And as we do that, and we've seen changes or efforts in the General Assembly to create some laws to sort of manage that, I don't think we're there. And I go tons of places, and I think, to your point, is that really what we want? Do we really want to fund that? That looks dangerous to me. Is that, should we, so I'm in agreement. If I'm
So-
going to do it,
Let's do
if
it
I'm going to pay
right.
for it, I don't want to be, and then our numbers go up, right? Our incidents go up. So we drive more money into bike ped. Guess what happens? We got more bicycle accidents, and more injuries, and more.
Well, especially
Well,
if
you'd
we
expect that, right? If you got more use, more. But the question is the way we doing it, is it the right way?
So that's just my request as part of this, is let's figure out what we're saying. My second request is really just a process request to help us get ready for the July meeting, which is, could staff send us an email or make available in some way all of the slide decks from when we've started talking about this? So that we have it in one place, so we don't have to go back and look for it in various meetings. Could we just, that would
Or
really help.
Can we do that, please?
Yes.
Okay, great. Mr. Coleman?
Thank you. I've kind of been sitting here silent, but have a lot to say. But first, my first comments to Ms. Jackson and Mr. Ho is thank you for all the work you did and interviewing all the members in the different districts. I don't know how much were redundant with what Fred and I had to say, but it was obvious that you were listening. I don't know how many other comments overlapped with what we said, but I took the time to go over pretty much the survey that was distributed on April the 18th. And I extracted several things that stood out to me. That safety and congestion by the respondents, they said that they wanted it 76% out of the 6 categories. Respondents felt scoring changes need adjustment along with application process and timeliness. There was a bias toward bike and ped projects, which has been stated today. Projects selected don't deliver value add. Concerns over assumptions and applications centered off of working systems to be successful versus truthful. Bias towards smaller projects, which has been stated, not higher priority projects that are really needed. Concerns regarding cost estimation and contingencies. And I found very interesting is incorporate military routes into methodology. I got very deep into the applications presented by Norfolk specifically, and I don't mean to pick on Norfolk because I'm just using this as an example to explain some of my points, but 8 out of 10 approved applications were bike ped strictly, and the other 2 have elements of bike ped in them in intersections. So after the meeting in April and this study results, I sat down and typed out a list of things that, if you'll indulge me, I'll read. I think the first thing that occurred to me is we must answer the question what kind of project CTB wants for the smart scale that deliver a more efficient process to delivery that are impactful and meaningful. What can be done by addressing the loophole that land use provides that should be measurable analytics to all categories? Safety and congestion should be more than 50% of scoring for all categories on the project. Scoring criteria that respondents to the OP survey requested on page 15 Smart Scale Process Review on 418. Safety and congestion apply a negative factor when either is affected by an application submitted on a project whether or not other factors are favorable. There should be a validation process required of assumptions, claims, data submitted, and application at the time of submission and at the completion of the project. What can be done to prevent localities from splitting up a project into small ones where costs are lower to opportunities to score well exist because of a multiplier effect? I'm using multiplier effect. I'll change that to bias. Created by the $10 million application. An example, Norfolk has a strategic plan that's 52 miles in 12 different corridors that in this particular round 5 of the 8 applicants, successful applications, it was over $35 million of smart scale funds that are being diverted. And it's being, and there's, Fred and I have talked, and the term we came up is gaming the system. They've learned, and I think Mr. Brown brought that up, and he did it much more correctly than politically correct than I did, but they've learned how to work the system to get approval. There should be a validation process required of assumptions, claims, or data submitted in the applicant or by the applicant at the time of submission at the completion of the project. What can be, a $10 million bar is questionable. If it's going to stay, why not have localities put some money in to have skin in the game in order to encourage them to move the project forward and start with completion of the project after the approval of the project. Right now, we have one in Norfolk that's been submitted that was in round 2. It's $833,000 that is escalated to $1.3 million that the city of Norfolk asked for some consideration to make up that difference, which Fred and I said, no way. And we aren't going to have, there's got to be accountability. Localities must start and finish projects within a reasonable time frame, and the skin of the game that would encourage this to occur. Smart scale should not be expected to cover escalation costs in projects except at CTB discretion. I think that is, we already determined that is true. I didn't know that in April when I typed this out. Bike and ped projects should be considered for other sources of funding outside of small scale. If not possible, CTB should establish a limit on project numbers or money committed. And I've got other comments, but I also was troubled with Norfolk's applications, because in the applications, they couched this as that this would take automobiles off the road and people would be riding bicycles. In reality, it's a major project for recreational bicycle use. They ignored I got my hands on a study done by the HRTPO that suggested 3 roads in Norfolk, Granby Street, Little Creek Road, and Shore Drive, which is a part of Ocean View Avenue, are off limits because of the critical nature to military infrastructure for daily commutes, as well as truck traffic getting in for aircraft going overseas to support our troops in both NOB, Naval Air Station Norfolk, and Little Creek. So the other troublesome thing is that the survey that was done that justified, in their mind, this particular project on Ocean View Avenue, it was done during COVID, so it skewed the amount of automobile traffic and bike traffic. It was elevated bike traffic, but then it was only 8 bikes a day using existing bike lanes and a reduced number of vehicles. It ignored the survey that they did. It only surveyed Ocean View residents. Over 70% of the people using this particular corridor, it was going to go on a road diet, were not residents of Ocean View or even of the city. And the comment I received from a city councilman is, if people are tired of sitting in traffic and congestion, let them move to Norfolk. So that wasn't the answer that I needed.
Mr. Coleman.
Yes.
These are all excellent points, okay? And I think we've gone through some of them. But we're getting pretty deep in the weeds here.
Yes, we
On
are.
a single thing. I think the points that you've made are exactly some of the points we've been talking about even before you were here, and you've grabbed onto them appropriately. So that's exactly the kind of things that we're trying to look at and make sure are addressed here. So you're 100% on point. If you'll allow me a little leeway here, I got something I need to do in the next 5 or 10 minutes, or the opportunity's going to go away.
I understand.
And I'd like to
Thank
try
you,
to get to that.
thank you for your time, and again, thank you for your work.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Good remarks. That completes the workshop for the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and I'm going to adjourn it and move to the action meeting so we can move into our next phase. So workshop is adjourned, action meeting is convened, and the first item on our agenda is a motion that Mr. Kasparitz.
Yes,
I'm going
sir.
to call on Vice Chairman Kasparitz to offer a motion.
Again, thank you, sir. I do have
And
before me.
let me say one before we get into this. I did some comments, but Mr. Coleman got me off script. Just teasing, sir. You know, as we go through this smart scale process and all this detail and all this stuff we're grappling with, and I was sitting here thinking, we'll have 2 new members next month, and they're going to be at ground zero, right? And I'm thinking like, wow, you know, I'm a year 9, you know, they're going to be at 0, and it's going to be some tough stuff. And it really just goes to the point, which is we've got 2 fantastic members that I've been with for a long time on this board who are rotating off. And it's, you know, happy for them perhaps, sad for us. And I will tell you, we will miss them a lot, right? We're going to get some great new board members, but these are 2 great ones in my experience here, and I'm going to miss them a lot. So, Mr. Kasparitz.
Great, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I do have before me a resolution of the Commonwealth Transportation Board dated June 21st today. The title is Commending Carlos M. Brown, my seatmate for over 8 years now. Whereas Carlos M. Brown served as a member of the Commonwealth Transportation Board representing the Richmond District from 2015 to 2023, having been appointed in 2015 by Governor Terry McAuliffe for a 4-year term and subsequently reappointed for a 4-year term by Governor Ralph Northam in 2019. And whereas Mr. Brown brought to his tenure on the board a dedicated record of leadership in the private sector, serving or having served as the Vice President and General Counsel for Dominion Energy, Managing Partner for Brown Martin PC, and Managing Member for Obsidian Capital Group, LLC, Associate for McGuire Woods, LLP, and McCandless Holton PC, and Director of the Dominion Energy Credit Union. And whereas, stand by, Mr. Brown has made significant contributions to the public sector and his community, including, but not limited to, having served as the inaugural chair and member of the Board of Directors for the Richmond Metropolitan Transportation Authority, member of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, inaugural chair of the Dominion African American Resource Group, secretary and member of the board for Feedmore Incorporated, member of the Board of Visitors for the University of Virginia, member of the Board of Trustees for the University of Virginia Richmond Ridley Fund. I paused to breathe. Member of the board for the Brookfield Foundation, director of Next Up, vice chair of the Board of Trustees for Virginia Museum of History and Culture, member of the Virginia Small Business Advisory Board, member of the Board of Visitors for Christopher Newport University, member of the Richmond Virginia Chamber of Commerce Foundation, member of the Board of Directors for the Virginia Poverty Law Center, member of the Board of Directors for the Boaz and Ruth Incorporated, and member of the Richmond Forum. And whereas Mr. Brown has been the recipient of numerous awards and honors throughout his distinguished career, including the Richmond Style Weekly Top 40 Under 40, Leader in Law from the Virginia Lawyers Weekly, Savoy Magazine Award for one of the most influential African-American attorneys in America, Virginia Legal Elite for Corporate Counsel by Virginia Business Magazine, Fellow of the Virginia Law Foundation, and GC Powerless.
He's tired.
Please, I pause. And whereas Mr. Brown diligently and tirelessly has played a significant role in transportation for the Commonwealth, serving as a member of the Commonwealth Transportation Board, both in his representation of the Richmond District and as a member of the Highway Renaming Work Group. And whereas in fulfilling his duties as a member of the board, his leadership, commitment, and insight have earned Mr. Brown the admiration and respect of his colleagues and the staff of Virginia Department of Transportation and the Department of Real and Public Transportation. And whereas the Commonwealth Transportation Board wishes to express its appreciation to Mr. Brown for his years of service to the board and to the Commonwealth, now therefore be it resolved by the Commonwealth Transportation Board that the members of this board extend to Carlos M. Brown their highest commendation and gratitude for his years of outstanding service on behalf of the citizens of the Commonwealth and convey their best wishes to him in all his future endeavors.
Right, you're out of order. You're out
Mr.
of
Secretary,
order.
Mr. Secretary.
Is there a second?
I heartily second this resolution to my good Irish friend, Carlos Brown.
And now, if you would like to signify your affirmation by rising with me and applauding Mr. Brown, it'd be appreciated.
Mr. Secretary,
Dr. Smoot.
that was it is an impressive resolution. One thing that it omitted, though, something that Carlos shared with me last month, is the distinguished engagement of his family in military affairs in the Commonwealth, particularly during the Civil War. My family was on the other side, so it is a particular pleasure to come together with Carlos here on the Transportation Board and work with him on work that I think advances the Commonwealth to the future. So, Carlos, thank you so much for that relationship.
Absolutely. Mr. Brown, you have been a very smart, affable, and critical leader on this board since I've been here, and you'll be deeply missed. Dr. Smoot, would you offer another motion, please, sir?
I will, and I regret having to do this because we're going to miss Bert a great deal. But Bert Dodson has been the person I have sat next to since I joined the board 6 years ago, and Bert, we have slowly worked our way up the table here, a lot slower than that side, by the way. But Gene told me that the reason that I was seated next to Bert was that, like me, he grew up in Lynchburg, and he's the only person who could understand me. So we've enjoyed some good conversations. Bert's family is well known and well regarded in the Lynchburg region. Bert has served on the city council, been vice mayor of Lynchburg. At Virginia Tech, we have the Dodson Urban Entomology Laboratory, which his family has been very involved with over the years. Bert has been quietly involved in many charitable works in the Lynchburg region. He doesn't like a lot of publicity. He just likes to get things done, and he has. And the thing that also is not in the resolution, but I certainly want to lift up, for which we all can be appreciative, is that the Dodson family has killed more rats, roaches, bugs of all kinds in the Commonwealth than any other family in its history. And good work, Bert. So I offer the following resolution. This is, yeah, that's right. And you can understand what I'm saying. Whereas Bert Dodson Jr. has served as a member of the Commonwealth Transportation Board representing the Lynchburg District from 2018 to 2023, having been appointed by Governor Ralph Northam in 2018 to fill an unexpired term, and subsequently reappointed for a full 4-year term by Governor Ralph Northam in 2019. Whereas Mr. Dodson brought to his tenure on the board a dedicated record of leadership in the private sector, serving as president and CEO of Dodson Pest Control, member of the board of directors of the Professional Pest Management Association, member of the National Pest Management Association, member of the Virginia Pest Management Association. Brett, I hope you haven't been smelling this stuff too much. Whereas Mr. Dodson has made significant contributions to the public sector in his community, having served as vice mayor of the city of Lynchburg for 6 years, member of the Lynchburg City Council, member of the Lynchburg Chamber of Commerce, member of the Virginia University of Lynchburg Board of Trustees, member of the 2005 Commonwealth of Virginia Commission for Transportation in Urbanized Areas, chair of the Lynchburg Regional Airport Commission, and is member of the Virginia Free Board of Directors. He is a lifelong member of Quaker Memorial Presbyterian Church in Lynchburg, and has served as president and a member of the Virginia High School League Foundation. And whereas Mr. Dodson has been the recipient of numerous awards throughout his distinguished career, including the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities Humanitarian Award, the Family Alliance of Lynchburg Friend of the Family Award, the Lynchburg chapter of the NAACP Citizen Achievement Award, the Advocacy Award from the Lynchburg Fire and EMS Department, the Small Business Champion in Virginia Award from the National Federation of Independent Business, and holds an honorary doctorate, Dr. Dodson, from the Virginia University of Lynchburg, the Virginia University Lynchburg Board Member of the Year Award, and the Virginia Pest Management Association Industry Stewardship Award, and the Sam Walton Business Leader Award from the Greater Lynchburg Chamber of Commerce. And whereas Mr. Dodson diligently and tirelessly has played a significant role in the transportation of the Commonwealth, serving as a member of the Commonwealth Transportation Board in his representation of the Lynchburg District, and whereas in fulfilling his duties as a member of this board, his leadership, commitment, and insight, some of which he shared with me privately off the microphone, which is fortunate, earned him the admiration and respect of his colleagues and the staff of the Virginia Department of Transportation and the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. And whereas the Commonwealth Transportation Board wishes to express its appreciation to Mr. Dodson for his years of service on the board and to the Commonwealth, now therefore be it resolved by the Commonwealth Transportation Board that the members of this board extend to Bert Dodson Jr. the highest commendation and gratitude for his years of outstanding service on behalf of the citizens of the Commonwealth, and convey their best wishes to him in all future endeavors.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It's my deep honor to second this motion for Mr. Dodson.
Now, if you will join me, if you will rise and to affirm this motion and applause, it'd be great.
I am totally humbled.
Dr. Dr. Dodson, excuse me.
Which is
Mr.
unusual for
Secretary,
me.
I've got a question if I can.
Let me say one thing first. Bert, when I came back to this board in my last term, you and Carlos were both here. And what, it was just great to work with both of you. We've had a lot of fun together, done a lot of good work. And we'll be sad to see you go, but we want you to come back and hang out with us a little bit. So,
Sure, if you're paying for everything, I'm fine.
we'll work it out, Bert. We'll
Thank
work
you,
it
sir.
out. But I will say this, because, listen, the folks on this board spend hundreds of hours every year. I mean, this isn't a show up and do it and check a box and move. There's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff to do every month. And it's a lot of darn work. And it's a significant sacrifice. And so it's just great. And the board works so well together. We have different views, right? We come from different places, backgrounds, different districts, different ways of looking at things. But in my time here, and I've been here in almost 10 years now, I mean, it doesn't matter. We just work to get stuff done for the citizens. And it's really a delight to have a relationship with both of
If
them.
I can say one thing, a lot of times people ask me about what goes on in the world and our country and has so much division. And I say, if we just remember that we're all Americans first, and in our beloved Commonwealth, we're all Virginians. And we can start from that process, we can get a lot more done. Thank you.
I'll defer my time to let Bert speak. What I was going to ask Bert, though, is now that you're leaving, who are you designating to take the baton in order to keep the secretary in line?
I got a raffle.
Failed miserably to begin with.
I got a raffle design for the highest bidder. And after that, I would give that to him or her.
Well, listen, I know that Mr. Brown needs to leave, and that's why I wanted to make sure we got this before he left us. I will also tell you that it's my intention to bring these gentlemen back, since I could not be with you last night, and do something that's really focused on them. So, yes, Mr. Brown.
So, Mr. Secretary, thank you all for this honor. This has indeed been one of the greatest pleasures of my life to serve in this capacity and the other transportation roles. I did some calculations. About 17% of my life I've been on this board. It feels like every minute of that. But, I've always believed that it's important to try to leave a thumbprint in things you're involved with. And this board and the development of Smart Scale and the impact we've had on the Richmond region and that we've had on the entire Commonwealth has given each of you the opportunity to do that. And I would just encourage you to recognize that you can really impact people's lives, the quality of life, and what we do. I apologize sincerely for having to leave. I'm supposed to be at my day job's board retreat somewhere not too close from here yesterday, and I didn't want to miss this because it's so important to me. But I actually need to leave to get to the airport. So again, I'll apologize for departing, but thank you all so much for being my friend.
I'm sticking around. I don't have a jet waiting for me. See you, Carlos.
Travel safely. All right, thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is public comment. We have one speaker this morning, Jim Outland. Jim, good morning. Welcome. Mr. Whitfield, are you going to speak today? No worries. Yes, Mr. Outland.
Mr. Secretary,
Welcome.
members.
Hope you're doing well this morning.
Yes, sir, doing fine, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak briefly. I'm missing the 3-minute clock, but I've learned a bit, and hopefully we'll cram it all in there. It's short, it's sweet, so.
Mr. Outline, you know our deal. We give you a little bit of latitude.
Yes, sir.
As long as we like what you're saying.
My first time was most traumatic, but I've gotten through that, so. But My name's Jim Outland. I live on the Eastern Shore. I work in Cape Charles. I'm here wearing a couple of hats today. I'm the general manager of Cononey Atlantic Company, which owns the Eastern Shore Railroad. I'm also a member of the board of the 501c3 Eastern Shore Rail Trail Foundation. And two of our representatives could not be here today, and I'm standing in for them, Mr. Ron Wolf, the chairman of the foundation, as well as Mr. Spencer Murray, who is the president of Cononey Atlantic Company. But we wanted to thank the board for their favorable consideration of the Shore's $8 million smart scale application that is pending approval from this body for a segment of the rail corridor to be converted to a rail trail. We think we really appreciate the support. And not just from the board, but we also wanted to acknowledge VDOT's support we've been receiving so far in our efforts to convert part of our corridor. Specifically, the Hampton Roads District Office. They have provided time and talent to us as we begin the process, and they're currently working on engineering and design work for the corridor. The district engineer, Mr. Chris Hall, has been very mindful of keeping things on progress and on schedule and is getting quarterly progress reports. Also, in March, his team hosted the public comment public hearing that was held on the shore, which was very well attended, and they got to see firsthand that our residents of the shore are very much in favor of the rail trail. But also here from Richmond, the central office has supported us with our recent February submission for a $23 million RAISE grant application to convert 16.8 miles of the corridor to a rail trail. So in conclusion, I would just say that the rail trail corridor provides an outstanding and unique opportunity to the Commonwealth to build an effective, cost-effective rail trail in the quickest time period for the following reasons. Cononey Atlantic Company has rail banked the corridor and is providing that to the Commonwealth at no cost. Construction costs should be hopefully limited in that it's a very straight corridor without bridges or tunnels or any extreme challenges there. Also, we have a dedicated local team in place that will gladly partner with any aspect of the Commonwealth wherever that's needed. We're already in place and able to respond. Finally, the majority of shore constituents are supportive of the effort and understand the opportunities that the rail corridor would provide, both as an economic driver, tourist driver, and also a safety aspect. So with those words, Mr. Chairman, I thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Outland. Appreciate you being here today. Mr. Rob Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, good morning. Welcome. Hope you're doing well today.
Commonwealth Transportation Board. I had planned to come to Charlottesville last month, but I made the mistake of taking the Silver Line to Dulles Airport. After all the steps that I had to take from A to B to C to D, I ended up feeling unwell, and I ended up later that day in the hospital. So,
well, we're glad you're here, and you look well today,
yeah,
Mr.
well,
Whitfield.
I'm
Glad
trying
you
to
recovered.
do, although the rain this morning was not too helpful. Thank you, first of all, for all the service that you do to the public. And I obviously have my disagreements at times, but as some of the folks who were here yesterday know, I try to work through things because I want Virginia to move forward successfully. And just the smart scale discussion this morning was complex. I had previously said last year it was as clear as mud. It's not much clearer now. And so I happened to meet Young Ho Chang, who used to work in Fairfax County. He says 20 years ago. So he knew me from those days. I was on the board of the Committee for Dulles. And when I first met Aubrey Lane I don't know if it was 2012 or 2014. At that time, the Port of Virginia was a member of the CTB, but there was no representation of the airports. And so, obviously, MWAR is a multi-state entity, but I believe, I mean, I served for almost 20 years on the board until I opposed tolls on the Dulles Toll Road, and then they promptly told me to go take a hike. I stand up for what I believe. I stand for fairness. In England, they have a saying, if it ain't cricket, it ain't fair. And so where, in terms of funding, allocation, ultimately I want fairness and equality for all. And so whether it's on supporting something like expanded bus transit throughout the Commonwealth, because my concern is that rail is vastly more expensive, or in how we allocate funding within Northern Virginia, I can only say that I don't know the status of studies around Dulles Airport, but I know that as an economic generator for the next 50 years, it is a primary generator, and I have spoken with Keith Merlin, and I just said to Mr. Chang that to follow up on what you did here this morning, sometime after Labor Day, there needs to be some kind of public forum, whether it's done by the Northern Virginia Transportation Alliance or jointly with NVTA. Somebody needs to come and explain the process that you went through this morning. So I'm usually the only person here from Northern Virginia, and if I don't understand it, I promise you the 99.9% of the people up there in Northern Virginia don't understand it too. So there's a whole education process with the proposed reforms that needs to be discussed. So many other issues, but I will put some of them in writing. So I don't know if this retreat is going to be open to the non-CTB members, but I would ask you make public at your earliest convenience. And as just a suggestion for future, I was told that the reason that the governor's conference has to be in Arlington was it was claimed that there wasn't a hotel big enough in Fairfax County. And so I offer to your consideration the Westfields Conference Center. That's where I met Governor George Allen in 2008, and we talked about Dulles Airport for 10 minutes. And somebody said to me, "How the hell did you do that?" I said, "Well, I just say what I know." That's
Thank you,
about.
Mr. Whitfield. That's a fantastic place, by the way. I've been there a few times. Thank you for your comments. And at the end of the day, the public engagement is at the essence of what we do. And so we want to hear from the public. And Mr. Whitfield, I'll tell you that as you've noted or may have noticed today, the members themselves struggle, and I put myself at the top of that list. And I'm doing this every day now, but not just this, but to explain the intricacies of the scoring of the district grant versus step 1, 2, and 3. It's not intuitive, and it's a little bit complicated. And so I can understand why others would struggle with that as well. And one of the goals of what we're trying to do is to make it a little bit less complicated while improving the result. And so we'll work on that. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. They were distributed in advance. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Merrill moves. Is there a second? Dr. Smoot seconds. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item 1, Office of Land Use, action on authorization of amendments to secondary street acceptance requirements. Mr. Hofrichter, welcome, sir. Hope you're well this morning.
Good morning, sir, members of the board. Before you right now is a resolution for the board's consideration directing VDOT to begin the process to make regulatory changes to the secondary street acceptance requirements in accordance with the recommendations from the Stakeholders Advisory Group of the Chapter 425 laws.
Any questions? Is there a motion?
Approval.
Ms. Hines moves. Is there a second? There's a second. All in favor? Is there any further discussion? Ms. Sellers seconds. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item 2, Mr. Offrichter.
Yes, sir. There is a discontinued segment of routes 19 and 58 in Russell County. The adjacent landowner would like to do something with the property, so has asked that those sections be abandoned.
Briefed, excuse me, correct? We briefed on it previously. Yes, we did in a workshop,
Okay.
I think.
Not this one.
If you didn't do this one, this is new?
Yes, sir.
So not briefed previously.
Correct.
That's important. Keep going.
The Russell County Board of Supervisors is in support, and there were no comments at the hearing. It's a 26/100ths of a mile. It's adjacent to an intersection that was built back in 1970.
Your motion to approve?
Mr. Folks' absence, I move to approve the motion.
Mr. Stanton moves. Is there a second? Dr. Smoot seconds. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Offrichter.
Thank you.
Next item is item number 3, Margie Ray, action on approval of federal safety performance metrics. Love that word. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Secretary Miller, members of the board. So last month, briefed you all on proposed metrics for our federal performance reporting, as well as aspirational goals to improve our safety outcomes, and requesting your approval of those metrics.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Dotson moves. There's a second.
Second.
Mr. Coleman seconds. Is there further discussion?
Secretary?
Yes, sir. Mr. Kasparitz.
Thank you. I respect the work that Ms. Ray and her team have done on this complex and very consequential issue. At this point, at this time, I lack sufficient understanding of the model and the data collected to make an informed decision, so I will therefore abstain when the vote's taken today. Thank
All
you.
right. Further discussion?
Mr. Secretary,
Ms. Hines?
I'm going to abstain today as well, for a slightly different reason, which is when we were here a year ago, we talked about needing to have a better understanding and new actions, that repeating what we've been doing was not moving the needle. And given the level of pedestrian bicycle fatalities in my district, I just feel like I can't vote for these today, so I'm going to abstain.
Further discussion? We have a motion. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. And no, 2 abstentions. Are there any other abstentions? Mr. Kasparitz and Ms. Hines abstain? All right. 3 abstentions. Anybody else? Did you vote yes?
No.
You didn't. You just didn't vote at all. Okay. All right. Ayes have it. Thank you, Ms. Ray. The next item on the agenda is item 4, action on approval of notices of intended regulatory action in conjunction with a periodic regulatory review. Joanne Maxwell. Good morning,
Mr.
ma'am.
Chair,
Welcome.
members of the board, I'm here simply to ask board action on an item you were briefed on last month. We are asking the board's approval to file a notice of intended regulatory action for the land use permit regulations, as well as the vegetation control regulations and associated documentation. When the NORA process is completed, we will be bringing back to this board, as directed by the board, the proposed regulation and seeking your approval for that as well.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Ms. Hines moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Kasparitz seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item number 5, Ms. Deem, action on authorization of the Commissioner of Highways to enter into a program coordination agreement and project-specific special interagency agreements with the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority.
Thank you. You just said most
That's a
of what I
mouthful.
was going to say.
That's a mouthful.
So yes, consistent with the briefing that the board received in April, we request your approval for the commissioner to enter into these 2 agreements to allow VDOT to assist VPRA in the administration of the Transforming Rail in Virginia program for certain services and support. And we
Your motion to
recommend your approval.
Ms. Sellers moves. Mr. Lawson, are you shaking your?
I'll second it.
Mr. Lawson seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes, sir. Mr. Merrill.
regarding the metrics for the safety,
Yes.
could we request, sorry to go back, I'm sleeping at the switch here. Can we go back and request that we get periodic updates on our performance, and not just in terms of raw numbers, but also in terms of rates? Because rates, as vehicle miles traveled, like fatalities per.
Oh,
you know,
rates. Okay.
Rates, yeah. Because right now, we have raw number of targets, but
No
also
problem.
be curious to know if our mileage is going up and our fatalities are staying same, then on a per mile basis, we're improving.
Can we bring that back on like just a quarterly update, just showing where their numbers are, Mr. Commissioner?
The raw numbers are easier to do. The rates are generated on an annual basis once we understand what changes to VMT occur. So numbers, yes.
Not tracking BMT that tightly. Okay, we'll do that. Thank you. And good suggestion. So the next item on the agenda is item 6, the action on the fiscal year 2024 annual budgets. Laura Farmer and Jennifer DeBrule.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm here on behalf of VDOT and DRPT to bring before you a resolution to approve the 2024 budgets for the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, for VDOT, and for DRPT.
Any comments? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Coleman moves, Mr. Casper seconds. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you, Ms. Farmer. Thank you, Mr. Brule. Next, item 7, Ms. Kim Pryor, action on FY 23 through 28 6-year improvement program transfers.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You have before you the list of transfers in the last month, and I recommend your approval.
So moved.
Ms. Hines moves. Is there a second? Mr. Merrill seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item 8, action on smart scale project cancellation cut Route 60.
Thank you. If you recall, I briefed the board last month on this proposed cancellation. There was significant public opposition to this project in Chesterfield County, resulting in delays and cost increases. The county requested cancellation of the project. I briefed you on this last month, and I recommend your approval.
So move.
Bucks moves. Ms. Sellers seconds. Is there further discussion? Mr. Merrill.
Yes, thank you. In the Round 5 funding, there is a project that's been approved for the Stanton District on Route 33 east towards Elkton. And it includes cut. So it would be advantageous for us to see if there is a way we could learn from the public resistance to this to improve the likelihood of having consumer acceptance in the future. Because I'm worried that we may encounter the same thing if it's perceived by the public as being disadvantageous to their daily lives, even though it might promote safety. So there's something we could perhaps learn from to try to sell this project.
Thank you, Ms. Merrill. Good point. Any further discussion? All in
Mr.
favor,
Secretary,
Yes, sir, Dr. Smoot.
I assume this was a safety-related project.
Yes, sir. Most of the points.
Is anything going to be done to address the safety concern?
Yes, sir. The district is working with the county to
That's right.
identify an alternative to address the safety issue for reapplication in round 6 or potentially through the safety program.
Thank you.
Question. Thank you. All right, so we have a motion and we have a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Item 9, action on 6-year improvement program and rail and public transportation allocations for 24 through 29.
Thank you. Yesterday, Mr. Brule and I both briefed the board on the VDOT and the Department of Rail and Public Transportation 6-year improvement program update for FY 24 through 29. Today, I'm offering a resolution for approval of that program, and I recommend your approval.
So moved.
Ms. Hines moves. Mr. Merrill seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Ms. Pryor, Mr. Dudley. Item 10. Welcome, Mr. Dudley. Good morning. Hope you're well.
Members of the board.
Action on FY 24 Arlington and Henrico maintenance payments.
Yes, sir. Item 10 is as you know, Virginia code requires that the board approve street maintenance payment rates for the counties of Arlington and Henrico. These are the only 2 counties in the state that operate and maintain their own local road systems. After adjustments for the budget increase and change in lane miles for each locality, the FY24 lane mile payment rate is recommended to be $23,573.25 for Arlington and $17,153.17 for Henrico County. Also included in the street maintenance payments is the distribution of overweight permit fees that is shared with all localities. This year, each locality will receive $11.74 per lane mile. We request your approval of this year's recommended payment rates identified in the attachments on your resolution.
So moved.
Ms. Hines makes the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Merrill seconds. Is there further discussion? He seconded with his right finger, right index finger. Be careful. I learned that, sir, as a young man at an auction with my mother when I went to yawn and I bought something. I just raised my arms up. She said, "Put your arms down." I digressed. I'm sorry. I think we have a motion and we have a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Is there any abstention? Thank you very much. Item 11, action on payments to cities, certain towns in Warren County for maintenance 2024.
Yes, sir. Virginia Code requires that the Commonwealth Transportation Board approve an annual payment rate to support the operation and maintenance of available streets for cities, towns with populations over 3,500, and other towns identified in code. These collectively are known as our urban system. The board also approves the annual inventory systems of our urban system. After adjustments for the budget increase and the change in moving lane miles for all localities, the FY24 moving lane mile payment rates are proposed to be $28,317.05 for arterial roads, $16,625.86 for local and collector roads. Also included in the street maintenance payments is the distribution of overweight permit fees, just as with Arlington and Henrico. And this year, each locality, as I noted, will receive $11.74 per lane mile. Our payments also include $1 million taken off the top for the city of Chesapeake to assist in the operation and maintenance of their movable bridges. They are the only locality in the state which operates movable bridges. Annually, the CTB also makes payment to 4 localities where the Virginia Port Authority owns tax-exempt real estate. $1 million is divided based on cargo throughput to those 4 localities, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Newport News, and that's where Warren County comes in. These payments, as well as the changes to the urban inventory, are identified in the attachments to the board's resolution, and we request your approval.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Lawson moves, Ms. Sellers seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Mr. Lawson, action on approval of guidelines and criteria for Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund. Welcome, sir. I hope you're well.
Thank you, sir. Just last month, we briefed you on the changes that were made to the TPOF guidelines that reflect the bill from last session. It was Chapter 547 of this past year that amends the TPOF program to allow the governor to direct funds directly to a project upon the recommendation of the Secretaries of Transportation and the Secretary of Commerce and Trade. Recommend approval.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Is there a motion to approve? Ms. Sellers moves. Is there a second? Is there further discussion?
I had one question, Mr.
Yes, sir,
Secretary.
Mr. Merrill.
Isn't this
Mr. Laird seconded. I didn't say that. Mr. Laird seconded. Sorry, Mr. Merrill.
Isn't this required by the statute that the legislature approved?
Isn't what?
Isn't this consistent with what the
Yes, it's
legislature?
consistent. It's just
we are-
it's guidelines that are consistent with the statute. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So we have a motion, we have a second. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Mr. Coker, welcome. Can you swap your 2 bids, please, to Stanton first?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary.
Morning,
members of the
sir.
board. I have 2 projects in excess of $5 million that I'm going to recommend for award. First project up is Order J73 in the Stanton District. This is a road construction widening project in the city of Waynesboro and Augusta County. We received 7 bids. Low bid from Branch Civil, Roanoke, Virginia for $9,985,000 even. It was within range, and I recommend approval.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Dotson, you jumping in there in the Stanton District, aren't you?
I just wanted to do it one last time. I'm sorry. One last time. I apologize.
I already had all this worked out.
Well, what happens, you just got to go with the flow there, Mr. Secretary.
I don't have to acknowledge your motion. I could just not even hear it.
Well, we can just do it over again. I could withdraw the motion.
Let's don't pull.
I want Mr. Dodson
Mr.
to be
Dotson
happy.
moves. Mr. Dotson moves for the love of his Stanton District, and Mr. Laird seconded. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Dotson, Mr. Coker.
Yes, sir. This project's order J16 in the Richmond District. This is the special structure Verona-Enon Bridge repairs in Chesterfield and Henrico County on I-295. We received 4 bids. Low bid was from Kekosian Construction Company, Westerville, Ohio, for $10,628,602. This does exceed the range, and we recommend approval.
Mr. Coker, because Mr. Dotson has such affection for Mr. Brown in the Richmond District, he's going to get the privilege of making the last motion of his board seat time in affirmation of his love and affection for Mr. Brown in the Richmond District. Mr. Dotson.
In the Commonwealth of Virginia, I so move the motion, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Dotson moves and Mr. Folks seconds. Is there further discussion? Mr. Folks, I'm sorry. Mr. Folks is normally there.
He's there.
And there's a book bag there. Mr. Yates, I'm sorry. No problem. I'm going too fast. I'm having too much fun with Mr. Dotson. That's what I'm doing. All right, let's be clear. Mr. Dotson moves, Mr. Yates seconds. Is there further discussion?
I'm out of here after this.
Well, we'll just pause for a little while then.
5 seconds.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. That concludes the scheduled part of this, other than new business. Is there any new business that anyone would like to bring before the board? Hearing none, and with great affection for our leaving members, I will adjourn the action meeting for June 2023. So adjourned.